Emma Richardson pressed her forehead against the cold airplane window, watching Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport shrink beneath her. The desert landscape stretched out like cracked caramel, subdivisions giving way to empty brown nothing dotted with saguaro cacti standing like silent sentinels. Seat 23C, middle seat, the absolute worst spot on any plane. But 13-year-old Emma was too exhausted to care, too drained to even complain. The week with her grandparents had been longer than usual. Harder, too. Grandpa Joe had seemed frail in a way that scared her, his hands shaking when he poured his coffee, his stories trailing off mid-sentence like he'd forgotten where they were going. Grandma Ellen had compensated by being extra cheerful, extra attentive, baking Emma's favorite snickerdoodles every single day until the kitchen smelled permanently of cinnamon and sugar. But it was the goodbye that stuck with Emma now, playing on repeat in her mind. Grandma had held her at the security checkpoint longer than normal, her small frame surprisingly strong, her lavender perfume overwhelming. When she finally pulled back, there were tears in her eyes, something Emma had never seen before. Grandma Ellen was Air Force tough, a veteran's wife who'd raised 2 kids while her husband deployed to Vietnam, Korea, and a dozen other places that never made it into history books. "Be brave, sweetheart," Grandma had whispered, her voice cracking. "No matter what happens, you remember you're a Richardson. We don't break. We bend and then we stand back up stronger." Strange words for a regular Tuesday afternoon flight home to Boston. Emma had wanted to ask what she meant, but Grandpa Joe had already started walking back toward the parking lot, moving slow, and Grandma had hurried after him with one last wave that looked almost like a salute. Now, buckled into 23C between a businessman who smelled like expensive cologne and a nervous woman clutching a People magazine, Emma felt the weight of that goodbye settle in her chest like a stone. Her phone buzzed one last time before she had to switch it to airplane mode. A text from her dad popped up on the screen. "Love you, baby girl. Remember what I taught you. Not everything you learn is meant for the classroom. Some knowledge is meant for the moment you need it most. Be safe, be smart, be you. Dad." Emma stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Her father, Colonel Jack Richardson, wasn't the type for emotional texts. He was direct, practical, all business, especially when he was deployed. But this message felt different, weighted, like he was trying to tell her something without saying it directly. She typed back, "Love you too, Dad. See you in 2 weeks. Don't crash your fancy jet." Smiling face with smiling eyes. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Please ensure all electronic devices are in airplane mode as we prepare for departure." Emma switched her phone off and shoved it into her backpack, which was stuffed with a week's worth of dirty clothes, 3 paperback books she hadn't touched, and her tablet loaded with her father's flight training materials. He'd given her that tablet 6 months ago, filled with technical manuals, navigation charts, emergency procedures for both military and civilian aircraft. "You're going to learn this stuff," he'd told her in their garage back home, his voice serious in a way that made her pay attention. "I know you think it's boring. I know you'd rather be on TikTok or whatever kids do now. But Emma, I need you to trust me. Learn this. Really learn it, because you never know when knowledge will save your life, or someone else's." She thought he was being paranoid. He'd had a close call over Syria 3 months before, some kind of systems failure that he wouldn't talk about in detail, classified stuff that made her mom go pale whenever it came up. Emma figured the near crash had rattled him, made him want to pass on everything he knew just in case. Now she had a tablet full of information she'd mostly memorized to make him happy. Boeing 737 systems, navigation protocols, emergency override procedures, stuff that seemed useless for a 13-year-old who wanted to be a marine biologist, not a pilot. The plane began to taxi, engines humming with that distinctive whine that Emma had heard hundreds of times growing up as a military kid. She'd lived on Air Force bases in Nevada, North Carolina, Germany, and briefly in Japan. She'd watched her father fly more times than she could count, had sat in the cockpit of an F-16 simulator, had attended airshows where the sky split open with the thunder of afterburners. Flying was in her blood, whether she wanted it to be or not. The businessman beside her opened his laptop the second the seatbelt sign dinged off. He was already typing frantically, glasses perched on his nose, completely absorbed in spreadsheets that looked mind-numbingly boring. On her other side, the nervous woman, mid-40s, wedding ring, sensible shoes, was gripping the armrest so hard her knuckles had gone white. "First time flying?" Emma asked, trying to be friendly. The woman gave her a tight smile. "Is it that obvious? I usually drive everywhere, but my daughter's having a baby in Boston and I couldn't miss it for the world." "You're going to be a grandma. Congratulations," Emma said. "Thank you, sweetie." The woman's grip loosened slightly. "Are you traveling alone?" "Yeah, just visiting my grandparents. My mom's picking me up in Boston." They chatted for a few more minutes, small talk that felt comforting in its normalcy, before Emma pulled out her earbuds. She scrolled through her playlist, selected her favorite lo-fi study beats, and pulled her father's oversized Air Force hoodie over her head like a protective cocoon. The cabin hummed with ordinary life. A baby cried somewhere in row 15, that distinctive wail that made every non-parent wince. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced efficiency, offering drinks and snacks with smiles that had been perfected over thousands of flights. The smell of bad coffee drifted from the galley, mixing with the recycled air that tasted vaguely of plastic and other people's breath. Emma felt her eyelids growing heavy. The week had been emotionally exhausting in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Saying goodbye to her grandparents had felt too final, too much like an ending instead of a "see you later." She let sleep pull her under, her last conscious thought a memory of her father teaching her how to read an altimeter, his patient voice explaining that knowing where you are is the first step to knowing where you're going. As Emma drifted into dreams of silver jets cutting through impossible blue skies, Flight 447 leveled off at 35,000 feet. Captain Michael Tors set the autopilot, settled back in his seat, and reached for his lukewarm coffee. In the cockpit, every instrument read normal, every system showed green, everything was perfect. Captain Tors had no idea that in exactly 47 minutes, his entire world, and the world of everyone on board, would change forever. He had no idea that the sleeping girl in seat 23C would wake up to save them all. But Emma's father had known. Somehow, Colonel Jack Richardson had known that his daughter would need every single thing he taught her. And soon, very soon, she would understand why. Captain Michael Tors was reaching for his coffee when the first alarm chirped. It was a small sound, barely noticeable over the ambient noise of the cockpit. A single, polite beep that most passengers would never hear. But to a pilot with 23 years of experience, that beep might as well have been a scream. Autopilot malfunction. Tors' hand froze halfway to the cup. His eyes snapped to the instrument panel, scanning the displays with the speed of someone trained to process life-or-death information in microseconds. The autopilot status light was blinking amber. Not red, not yet, but amber was never good. "Jen, you seeing this?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. First Officer Jennifer Walsh was already leaning forward, her fingers flying across the touchscreen displays. At 34, she was one of the sharpest pilots Tors had ever flown with, Harvard engineering degree, former Navy flight instructor, and calm enough under pressure to make a Buddhist monk look anxious. "Running diagnostics now," she said. Her voice was steady, professional, but Tors caught the microscopic tightening around her eyes. She was worried. The diagnostic screen filled with data. Walsh's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Primary autopilot module showing intermittent connectivity. Could be a software glitch. "I'm switching to secondary." Her finger moved to toggle the backup system. The second alarm screamed to life before she could touch it. This one wasn't polite. This one was urgent, insistent, the kind of alarm that made your heart rate spike and your hands sweat. The cockpit lit up like someone had thrown a switch on a slot machine. Red lights, yellow warnings, orange cautions cascading across every screen. Navigation system failure. Flight management computer error. Backup autopilot unavailable. Altitude hold disconnected. What the hell? Walsh's professional composure cracked for the first time in her career. Her hands moved faster now, trying to isolate the problem, trying to find the source of the cascade. Mike, I'm losing systems across the board. This doesn't make sense. These are independent circuits. They shouldn't fail simultaneously. Torres felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He'd been flying since he was 19 years old, commercial jets for 2 decades. He'd handled engine failures, hydraulic problems, even a bird strike that shattered his windscreen over Denver. But he'd never seen anything like this. Multiple independent systems failing at once. That didn't happen. That couldn't happen. These aircraft were designed with redundancy upon redundancy, backup systems for the backup systems. Unless something catastrophic was happening. Manual control, Torres said, gripping the yoke. He felt the plane respond to his hands. That was good, at least. The flight control surfaces were still working, but flying a Boeing 737 manually for hours wasn't just difficult, it was exhausting. And without proper navigation systems in unfamiliar airspace, it was dangerous. Navigation computer is completely dark, Walsh reported, her fingers still dancing across the screens, trying every reset procedure she knew. I'm trying to reboot from the tertiary system, but wait. Oh no, Mike, the tertiary system isn't responding either. Torres felt sweat bead on his upper lip despite the cool cockpit air. Get me Memphis on the radio. I want every engineer they've got looking at this. Walsh grabbed the radio. Memphis Center, this is Flight 447 Heavy. We have multiple system malfunctions. Requesting immediate technical assistance. The reply came back with professional calm that Torres knew was masking concern. Flight 447, Memphis Center. Confirm nature of malfunction. Multiple Memphis. We have autopilot failure, navigation system failure, flight management computer errors. We're showing cascading failures across independent systems. Walsh paused, reading another screen. And we just lost our primary GPS receiver. A longer pause this time. When the controller came back, Torres heard something new in his voice. Worry. Flight 447 understood. Switching you to emergency frequency and patching in airline technical support. Be advised, I'm showing significant weather development ahead of your current track. Severe thunderstorm cells building at your 10 o'clock, approximately 80 miles out. Torres pulled up the weather radar. What he saw made his mouth go dry. The screen showed a massive storm system, a wall of red and purple that looked like something out of a nightmare. Level 5 cells. Lightning. The kind of weather you flew around, not through. The kind of weather that required precise navigation and careful planning. The kind of weather you absolutely could not fly through, with dead navigation systems. How wide is that cell? Torres asked, though he already knew the answer would be bad. Approximately 120 miles east-west, Flight 447, and it's moving toward your position. Current track has you intersecting the system in approximately 43 minutes. Torres did the math in his head. At their current speed, 43 minutes gave them almost no margin. They needed to navigate around that storm or find a way through a gap. But how do you navigate precisely when your navigation systems are dead? Memphis, what airports do we have within range for emergency landing? Checking now, 447. Closest suitable airport is Springfield Branson, approximately 75 miles south-southwest, but that puts you directly toward the storm system. Walsh was staring at the weather radar like it was a personal enemy. We could try to climb over it. Not at our current weight and fuel load, Torres said. We'd need to dump fuel, and that takes time we don't have. He made a decision. Memphis, Flight 447 is declaring an emergency. We need vectors around that weather, and we need every available technical resource working on our system's failure. Roger 447, emergency declared. All traffic is being cleared from your airspace. Technical support is being connected now. Stand by. A new voice crackled over the radio, someone from the airline's operations center, speaking quickly, urgently. Flight 447, this is operations. We're seeing your telemetry. Can you describe exactly what systems have failed? Torres let Walsh handle the technical description while he focused on flying. Every few seconds, another warning light would illuminate. Another system would degrade. It was like watching a patient slowly bleed out, and he had no idea how to stop it. Behind them, separated by a reinforced door, the cabin remained mostly quiet. Most passengers were reading, sleeping, watching movies on their seatback screens. They had no idea their plane was dying from the inside out. In seat 23C, Emma Richardson shifted in her sleep, her subconscious mind registering a change in the engine pitch, a subtle difference in the way the aircraft was moving. Her father's training ran deep. Even asleep, part of her brain was monitoring, assessing. But she didn't wake, not yet. Mike, Walsh's voice was tight. The flight management computer just rebooted itself and, oh God, look at this. Torres leaned over. The screen displayed a string of error codes he'd never seen in 2 decades of flying. Random characters, alphanumeric soup that made no sense. That's not a normal error code, Walsh whispered. That's not anything I've ever seen. Torres felt ice in his veins. What the hell is happening to my airplane? The storm ahead grew closer. The systems kept failing, and somewhere in the back of Torres' mind, a terrible question formed. What if they couldn't fix this? What if whatever was wrong kept getting worse? What if they needed help that normal procedures couldn't provide? He looked at Walsh. She looked back, and in that moment they both knew they were facing something unprecedented. In 30 minutes, Captain Michael Torres would make the most unusual decision of his career. But right now, all he could do was fly, and pray that someone somewhere had an answer. The plane shook slightly as they hit light turbulence. The storm was getting closer, and time was running out. Captain Michael Torres had made thousands of decisions in the cockpit. Most were routine, adjusting altitude, changing routes, deciding when to turn on the seatbelt sign. Some were harder, diverting for medical emergencies, handling unruly passengers, navigating through unexpected weather. But he'd never made a decision like this. Mike, we've got 28 minutes before we hit that storm, Walsh said, her voice tight. She was working 3 screens at once, trying every procedure, every reset, every trick she'd learned in 15 years of flying. Nothing was working. Operations is saying they need at least an hour to diagnose the problem remotely. We don't have an hour. Torres stared at the dead navigation screens, then at the weather radar showing that massive wall of thunderstorms growing closer every second. His mind raced through options like a computer running scenarios. Option 1, try to fly around the storm blind. Impossible. The system was too large, and without precise navigation, they could fly straight into the worst of it. Option 2, emergency landing at the nearest airport. But they'd have to navigate through or around the weather to get there, and without instruments, that was suicide. Option 3, keep trying to fix the systems. But time was running out, and whatever was wrong was beyond anything Walsh or the technical team had ever seen. There had to be another option, something outside the manual, something unprecedented. Torres' mind flashed to his early days in aviation, back when he'd trained alongside military pilots. The difference between civilian and military flying wasn't just the aircraft, it was the mindset. Military pilots were trained for catastrophic failures, for flying manually in combat conditions, for navigating without computers when the enemy took out your electronics. Fighter pilots especially, they could fly through hell with half their instruments dark and still hit their target. "Jen," Tor said slowly, "what if we had someone on board with military navigation experience? Someone who could help us manually navigate around that weather using backup procedures?" Walsh looked at him. "You mean like a military pilot? Mike, what are the odds?" "Flight 447, Memphis Center," the radio crackled. "We're analyzing your situation. Recommend you begin descent to avoid icing conditions near that cell. Target altitude 27,000 feet." But descending meant burning more time, getting closer to the storm. Tors felt the weight of 183 souls pressing down on him. Every passenger was someone's child, someone's parent, someone's entire world. He made 3 decisions in 30 seconds. First, tell the passengers something. They deserve to know. Panic might spread, but uncertainty and silence were worse. Second, get every available resource helping them. Air traffic control, airline operations, anyone who could provide guidance. Third, do something that would either save everyone on board or end his career in spectacular fashion. He reached for the PA system. His hand was shaking, actually shaking, something that hadn't happened since his first solo flight decades ago. He steadied it against the throttle, took a deep breath, and picked up the handset. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The cabin, already tense from the subtle changes in flight, went instantly silent. Emma Richardson stirred slightly in seat 23C, her subconscious registering the unusual tone, but didn't wake. A businessman in row 12 looked up from his laptop. A mother in row 8 pulled her headphones off her daughter's ears. The nervous woman next to Emma, Linda Chen, though Emma didn't know her name, gripped her armrest tighter. "We're experiencing technical difficulties with our navigation and autopilot systems," Tors continued, keeping his voice calm and authoritative despite his racing heart. "The aircraft is flying safely and normally, but I need to make an unusual request to ensure we navigate through some weather ahead." He paused. This was it, the moment that would define everything that came next. "If there is a military fighter pilot on board this aircraft, active duty or retired, please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately. I repeat, any military fighter pilots, current or former, please make yourself known to the crew." The silence that followed felt like the entire world holding its breath. Then chaos erupted. Did he just? Oh my God. Fighter pilot, why would they need? Mommy, what's happening? A man in first class stood up, his face pale. This is bad. This is really bad. He wouldn't ask for that unless. Everyone remained calm. Flight attendant Maria Santos called out, but her own voice wavered. She'd been flying for 12 years. She'd handled medical emergencies, drunk passengers, even a small fire in the galley once. But this, the training manual had no chapter on the captain requesting military pilots. In row 20A, a woman with short gray hair and reading glasses slowly closed her book. Her hands, resting on the pages of a thriller she'd stopped processing 3 paragraphs ago, began to tremble. Lieutenant Colonel Diana Chen, retired, though she still sometimes woke up reaching for a flight stick that wasn't there, had heard the captain's words with crystal clarity. Every syllable had landed like ordnance. She was a fighter pilot, F-15 Eagles, 23 years of service, 2 wars, countless missions, 3,200 combat hours in some of the most advanced aircraft ever built. She was also terrified. The nightmares had started 5 years ago, right before she'd retired. Dreams of missiles she couldn't evade, of systems failing at Mach 2, of the moment her wingman went down over hostile territory and she'd been powerless to help. She'd seen a therapist, worked through it mostly. But she'd also made herself a promise. Never again. No more life-or-death decisions at altitude. No more responsibility for lives hanging by a thread. She'd done her time. She'd earned her peace. Is anyone here a military pilot? Maria was walking the aisle now, her eyes scanning faces desperately. Please, if you are, we need you. Diana kept her eyes on her book, on words she wasn't reading. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Just stay quiet. Someone else will respond. It's not your problem anymore. But she looked around the cabin, really looked. She saw a young couple holding hands, their wedding rings gleaming. An elderly man with an oxygen cannula, probably flying to see his grandchildren. A teenage boy with Down syndrome, grinning at something on his iPad, completely unaware of the danger. A woman 7 months pregnant, her hand on her belly. Diana closed her eyes. She saw her daughter's face, her son-in-law, her 2-year-old granddaughter who called her Nana and thought she hung the moon. If this plane went down, these people would never see their families again. Just like Colonel Marcus Williams, her wingman, never saw his family again after that mission over Kandahar. Ma'am, Maria was standing in front of her now, reading something in Diana's posture, her bearing, the way she held herself even in civilian clothes. Ma'am, are you a pilot? The entire row went silent, passengers turning to stare. Diana opened her eyes, looked up at Maria's desperate, hopeful face. Say no, just say no. You've earned your retirement, you've sacrificed enough. But then she heard it, a baby crying somewhere in the back of the plane, the sound of innocence, the sound of a future that deserved to exist. Diana Chen had flown through enemy fire. She'd landed on carriers in storms that grounded half the fleet. She'd made decisions that saved lives and decisions that still woke her up at 3 a.m. with tears on her face. One more mission, that's all this was, one more mission. She raised her hand and her voice came out steady despite everything. I am Lieutenant Colonel Diana Chen, United States Air Force, retired, F-15 pilot. Maria's face flooded with relief so profound it almost looked like pain. Thank God, please come with me. Diana unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. The walk to the cockpit felt like the longest of her life, longer than any mission, any combat flight, any moment she'd spent strapped into an ejection seat knowing she might not make it home. Every passenger watched her pass. Some looked hopeful, others looked terrified that they needed a fighter pilot at all. In seat 23C, Emma Richardson finally started to wake up, pulled from sleep by the commotion, the tension, the change in the cabin pressure that her trained senses recognized even before her conscious mind did. But she wasn't fully awake yet, not quite. That would come soon, and when it did, everything would change. Maria knocked on the cockpit door, 3 sharp raps. Torres opened it immediately, his eyes going straight to Diana's face, reading her the way he'd read instruments his entire career. Lieutenant Colonel Diana Chen, United States Air Force, retired, she said crisply, falling back into military bearing like putting on an old jacket. F-15 Eagle pilot, 3,200 combat hours. Last flew 5 years ago. What do you need, Captain? Torres almost sagged with relief. Everything. Diana Chen stepped into the cockpit and her entire world snapped into focus. It was muscle memory, instantaneous and absolute. The instrument panel lit up in her mind like a targeting display. Her eyes swept left to right, top to bottom, cataloging every gauge, every screen, every warning light in less than 3 seconds. The fighter pilot brain she thought she'd retired activated like someone had flipped a switch. Airspeed 480 knots, altitude 35,000 feet, heading 67 degrees, fuel adequate, engine temps normal. But the navigation displays, oh God, the navigation displays were a disaster. "Show me everything," Diana said, moving beside the captain's seat. Her voice was calm, authoritative, the voice she'd used to lead combat missions over 2 continents. But inside, her heart was racing. Captain Torres gestured to the screens. Autopilot failed first, then navigation. Flight management computer crashed and won't reboot. We've lost GPS, backup GPS, and the tertiary navigation system. We're flying manually with degraded instruments. Diana leaned closer, studying the error code scrolling across the display. Her fingers itched to touch the controls to start troubleshooting, but this wasn't her aircraft, not her cockpit. She had to remember that. "How long ago did this start?" she asked. 18 minutes, Walsh answered from the right seat. "And it's cascading. Every few minutes we lose another system. It's like," she hesitated, "it's like something is systematically shutting us down." Diana felt ice in her veins. In 23 years of military flying, she'd seen equipment failures, software glitches, even combat damage. But this pattern, independent systems failing in sequence, this was different. "Could be a cyber attack," Diana said quietly, "or a fundamental electrical failure propagating through the system. Either way," she looked at the weather radar and her stomach dropped. "Either way, you've got a bigger problem. That's storm cell." Torres nodded grimly. 23 minutes until we reach it, maybe less if it's moving faster than predicted." Diana studied the massive red and purple blob on the radar. Level 5 thunderstorm. The kind that could tear a plane apart if you hit the wrong part of it. She'd flown through bad weather in fighters, small, nimble aircraft designed to take punishment. But a commercial 737 with 183 souls on board. That was different math entirely. "You can't fly through that," she said. "Not blind, not without precision navigation." "I know," Torres said. "That's why I called for you." Diana straightened up, and for a moment, just a moment, she was back in the cockpit of an F-15 over Afghanistan, her wingman's voice crackling in her headset. "Viper lead, I'm hit. I'm hit. Systems failing." She'd watched him go down, watched the ejection seat fire, watched the parachute deploy over hostile territory. She'd circled overhead, helpless, calling for rescue, knowing it would take too long, knowing he was already surrounded. Colonel Marcus Williams, father of 3, 42 years old. He'd survived the crash but died in captivity 3 days later. Diana had flown the mission perfectly, done everything right, and it hadn't mattered. She became aware that both Torres and Walsh were staring at her, waiting. "Colonel," Torres said softly, "are you okay?" Diana blinked, forcing herself back to the present. "I haven't flown anything in 5 years, she said, and heard the tremor in her own voice. "I'm retired. I'm not sure I'm the right person for this." The words felt like betrayal even as she spoke them, but they were true. She'd retired for a reason. The nightmares, the constant weight of responsibility for other people's lives, the knowledge that one mistake, one moment of hesitation could end everything. "I don't need you to fly the plane," Torres said. His voice was steady, calm, and something in it reminded Diana of her old squadron commander, a man who'd always known exactly what to say to get her head back in the game. "I need your expertise. I need someone who knows how to manually navigate in extreme conditions, someone who's trained for system failures and can think like a military pilot." "Captain, There are 183 people on this plane," Walsh interrupted. Her voice was tight but controlled. 63 of them are children. We have a 2-month-old baby in row 4. We have a man with a heart condition who barely got medical clearance to fly. We have a bride on her way to her wedding and a soldier heading home on leave, and her voice cracked. "And my mom, who's flying to visit me. She's in seat 31B. Diana looked at Walsh, really looked at her, saw the fear underneath the professional composure, saw a daughter terrified she was going to die in the same aircraft as her mother. "I'm scared too," Diana admitted. "I've been scared for 5 years, that's why I got out." "But you're here now," Torres said, And right now, scared is fine. Scared keeps you sharp. But we need your help, Colonel, please." Diana closed her eyes, took a breath. In her mind, she saw Marcus Williams's face, heard his last transmission, "Tell my kids I love them." She'd carried that message, stood at his funeral, looked his widow in the eyes and lied about how quickly it had happened, how he hadn't suffered. She'd sworn never to carry another message like that. But what if her refusal to help meant someone else would have to? What if her fear condemned all these people, the children, the soldier, the bride, Walsh's mother, to a fate that could have been prevented? Diana opened her eyes and looked at the weather radar again, then at the degraded instruments, then at Torres and Walsh, who were waiting with desperate hope on their faces. She thought about her granddaughter, 2 years old, perfect. Would she want Nana to be the kind of person who walked away when people needed her, or would she want Nana to be brave? "Okay," Diana said, and her voice came out stronger. "Okay, I'm in, but we need to work fast and we need to work smart." She pointed at the weather display. "We can't go through that storm, so we need to find a gap. Show me the satellite weather feed." Walsh pulled it up. Diana studied the massive storm system, her fighter pilot brain analyzing angles, vectors, timing. There, a narrow corridor between two major cells, maybe 15 miles wide, shrinking. "There," she pointed. "That gap. If we adjust heading to 045 and increase speed, we might be able to thread through before it closes." "Might?" Torres asked. "I'm a fighter pilot, Captain, not a fortune teller," Diana said, and despite everything, a hint of her old confidence crept back into her voice. "But I've flown through worse with less. The real problem is navigation. We need to hit that gap precisely. A mile off course either way and we fly straight into the worst of the storm." "How do we navigate precisely with no GPS, no flight computer and degraded instruments?" Walsh asked. Diana pulled out her phone. "Old school. I've got a navigation app, civilian, but it'll work. We'll cross-reference with your remaining instruments, use dead reckoning and—" She paused, thinking. "We'll need constant communication with air traffic control. They can give us radar vectors." Torres was already reaching for the radio. "Memphis Center, Flight 447. We have a retired Air Force pilot assisting. We're going to attempt to navigate around the weather. We'll need continuous vectors and updates." "Roger, Flight 447, the controller responded, and Diana heard relief in his voice. "We have you on radar, ready to assist." Diana rolled up her sleeves, literally and figuratively. "All right, Captain, you fly the plane. First officer, you handle communications and monitor our backup instruments. I'll navigate. We work as a team, we communicate constantly, and we don't second-guess each other, just like a combat mission." Torres nodded. "What's our first move?" "Course correction to 045 degrees, increase speed to maximum safe cruise. We need every second we can get." Diana pulled out her phone, opened the navigation app, and started calculating. "Time to that gap is approximately 19 minutes at current speed. 17 if we push it." "Pushing it," Torres said, advancing the throttles. The plane accelerated. Diana felt it in her bones, that sensation of speed, of urgency, of commitment to a course of action. It felt familiar. It felt terrifying. It felt right. Behind them in the cabin, passengers were starting to realize something serious was happening. The flight attendants were trying to maintain calm, but tension rippled through the aircraft like electricity. In seat 23C, Emma Richardson finally opened her eyes fully. She pulled out her earbuds, immediately aware that something was wrong. The engine pitch was different, higher, faster. The plane was maneuvering, actually maneuvering, not just the gentle course corrections of autopilot. Someone was hand-flying this aircraft, and that only happened when things were very, very wrong. Emma's heart started to pound. Emma Richardson's eyes snapped open, and she knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just one thing, it was everything. The way the plane felt beneath her, the subtle vibrations that weren't quite right. The engine pitch was higher, more aggressive, like they were pushing the aircraft harder than normal. And the movements, small banks, gentle corrections, these weren't the smooth, computer-controlled adjustments of autopilot. This was manual flying. Someone had their hands on the controls. Her father had taught her the difference years ago, making her close her eyes during flights, teaching her to feel the aircraft, to read it like a language written in motion and sound. Autopilot flies like a robot baby girl, he'd said. Smooth, predictable, almost boring, but when a human flies, you can feel it. The tiny overcorrections, the personality in the movements. If you're ever on a plane and you feel that switch, something's happened. Emma pulled out her earbuds and sat up straight, her heart already beginning to race. The cabin was wrong too. The nervous energy was palpable, passengers whispering urgently to each other, a woman across the aisle crying softly into her hands, a man 3 rows up standing in the aisle despite the seatbelt sign being illuminated, arguing with a flight attendant in harsh whispers. "What's happening?" Emma asked the woman beside her. Linda, she'd said her name, was during their brief conversation before takeoff. Linda's face was pale, her knuckles white where they gripped the armrest. The captain, he asked for a fighter pilot. He got on the intercom and asked if there was a military fighter pilot on the plane. Her voice shook. Why would he need a fighter pilot unless something was really, really wrong? Emma felt ice water dump into her stomach. Her mind immediately started cataloging possibilities: navigation failure, control system problems, autopilot malfunction. Her father had drilled emergency scenarios into her head for months. At the time, she'd thought he was being obsessive, paranoid even, after his close call over Syria. Now she understood. Did anyone respond? Emma heard herself ask, her voice surprisingly steady despite her thundering heart. A woman. She went up to the cockpit maybe 5 minutes ago. You were asleep. Linda wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, sweetie. You shouldn't have to deal with this. You're just a kid. But Emma wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was racing, connecting dots, pulling up information from the hundreds of hours her father had spent teaching her. Fighter pilot needed, navigation problems, manual flying. She reached down and grabbed her backpack from under the seat in front of her, her hands shaking as she unzipped it and pulled out her tablet. The tablet her father had given her 6 months ago with those strange, weighted words. Some knowledge is meant for the moment you need it most. Emma's fingers flew across the screen, navigating to the folder labeled Emergency Procedures Study Materials. She'd thought it was just homework, just another thing her dad wanted her to learn to feel connected to his world. But now, scrolling through the files, she saw them with new eyes. Boeing 737 Navigation System Architecture. Manual Override Protocols, Military Grade. Emergency Backup Procedures for Commercial Aircraft. Navigation Computer Reboot Sequences. And then she saw it. A file she'd opened once before but hadn't fully understood. A note from her father was attached to it. Emma, read this carefully. What I'm about to tell you is not in standard pilot training. After my incident over Syria, I learned something that saved my life. There's a backup navigation override system in most commercial aircraft that was installed after a classified military incident. Most civilian pilots don't know it exists. I'm teaching you this because if you're ever in a situation where a plane's navigation systems fail catastrophically, this knowledge could save lives. The procedure is technical and specific. Memorize it. I hope you never need it, but if you do, you'll know what to do. I love you. Be brave. Dad. Emma opened the file with trembling hands. The document was detailed, technical, filled with diagrams and step-by-step procedures that looked like they belonged in a classified military briefing, not on a 13-year-old's tablet. But she'd studied it. She'd actually memorized most of it because her father had quizzed her on it, made her draw the diagrams from memory, walk through the procedures until she could recite them in her sleep. She read it again now, her mind sharp with adrenaline, and understood what she was looking at. A complete procedure for manually overriding and rebooting a commercial aircraft's navigation computer using military-grade backup protocols. Exactly what they might need right now. Emma's hand stopped shaking. A strange calm settled over her, the same calm she'd seen in her father's eyes when he talked about flying combat missions. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of purpose. She looked up at Linda. "I need to go to the front of the plane." "What? No, honey, you need to stay in your seat. It's too dangerous to." "My dad is an Air Force colonel, F-16 pilot. He's been teaching me about aircraft systems since I was 6 years old." Emma's voice was steady now, clear. "I have information on my tablet that might help. Emergency procedures, technical specifications, things that might," she swallowed hard, "things that might save us." Linda stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You're 13 years old." "I know." Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "But I'm also Colonel Jack Richardson's daughter, and if he were here he'd help, so I have to." She stepped into the aisle. A flight attendant immediately started toward her, Maria, her name tag read, looking stressed and exhausted. "Sweetie, please sit down. We're in an emergency situation and—" "I know," Emma interrupted. "That's why I need to talk to the pilots, right now, please." Maria put a gentle but firm hand on Emma's shoulder. "I understand you're scared, but the safest place for you is in your seat with your—" "My father is Colonel Jack Richardson, United States Air Force, stationed at Nellis Air Force Base." Emma spoke quickly, urgently, the words tumbling out. "He's an F-16 pilot with 17 years of service. He's been teaching me about aviation systems, emergency procedures, and backup protocols since I was 6 years old because he almost died in a systems failure over Syria 8 months ago." Maria's hand loosened slightly. Emma pressed on. "I have technical manuals on this tablet, emergency override procedures for navigation systems, military-grade backup protocols that aren't in standard civilian pilot training. My dad made me memorize them. He said," her voice cracked, "he said someday I might need them. He said knowledge could save lives." Maria looked at this 13-year-old kid in an oversized Air Force hoodie, clutching a tablet like it was a life preserver, and saw something in her eyes. Not childish bravado, not panic, but the same focused intensity she'd seen in military personnel, the kind of calm that comes from training and preparation. "What kind of procedures?" Maria asked carefully. Emma pulled up the file, showed her the technical diagram, complex, detailed, clearly professional. "Auxiliary navigation override. It's a backup system that was installed after a classified incident. It can reboot the navigation computer by bypassing failed systems. Most civilian pilots don't know about it because it was developed for military contingencies." Maria stared at the screen. She couldn't understand half of what she was looking at, but it looked legitimate, professional, real. And they were desperate. "Wait here," Maria said. She walked quickly to the cockpit, knocked urgently. Emma stood in the aisle, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Around her, passengers were staring. Some looked hopeful, others looked skeptical. One man muttered, "This is insane. She's just a kid." But Emma kept her eyes forward, kept her breathing steady the way her father had taught her. "In a crisis, your body will want to panic. Your job is to override that instinct. Breathe, focus, execute." The cockpit door opened. Maria spoke quickly to someone inside. Emma couldn't hear the words. Then Maria turned and gestured for her to come forward. Emma walked toward the cockpit on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Every step felt enormous, significant, like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. When she reached the door, she looked inside and saw 3 people. Captain Torres in the left seat, a woman she didn't know in the right seat, and another woman standing between them. Older, gray-haired, with the bearing of someone military. the fighter pilot who'd responded to the captain's call. Captain Torres turned and looked at Emma. His face was lined with stress, his eyes exhausted. But when Maria explained who she was and what she had, something flickered in his expression. "Hope, Colonel Richardson's daughter?" Torres asked. "Yes, sir," Emma said, and her voice came out strong. "And I think I can help." Captain Michael Torres had been flying for 23 years. He'd handled emergencies that would make most people's hair turn white. But he'd never had a 13-year-old girl standing in his cockpit doorway telling him she could save his airplane. His first instinct was to say no, to send her back to her seat where she'd be safe, protected from the weight of what they were facing. She was just a kid, for God's sake. She should be worrying about homework and boys and social media, not catastrophic navigation failures at 35,000 feet. But desperation made people do strange things, and Torres was desperate. "Come in," he said, gesturing Emma inside. "But make it quick, we don't have much time." Emma stepped into the cockpit, and despite her fear, despite her racing heart, she felt a strange sense of rightness. She'd been in cockpits before. Her father had taken her into F-16 simulators, let her sit in the actual aircraft on the ground. But this was different. This was real. This was life and death. Diana Chen turned to look at her, and Emma saw the skepticism immediately. The fighter pilot's eyes swept over her, taking in her age, her oversized hoodie, her nervous hands clutching the tablet, and Emma could practically hear her thinking, "This is what we're pinning our hopes on. A child." "Emma Richardson," Emma said, meeting Diana's gaze directly the way her father had taught her. "My dad is Colonel Jack Richardson, F-16 pilot, Nellis Air Force Base. He's been deployed over Syria, Afghanistan, and Korea. He's taught me aircraft systems and emergency procedures since I was 6. "Your dad sounds like a good teacher," Diana said, not unkindly. "But teaching and doing are very different things, especially in an emergency." "I know," Emma said, "but he didn't just teach me theory. He made me memorize procedures. He made me understand systems. He said," she paused, remembering her father's intense expression in their garage, the way he'd gripped her shoulders. "He said after his close call over Syria, he realized that knowledge only matters if you can use it when everything's falling apart." Torres exchanged a glance with Diana. "What kind of close call?" "Navigation failure. His F-16 systems crashed during a combat mission. He had to manually reboot everything while flying through hostile airspace." Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke, channeling her father's confidence. "He found a backup override system that wasn't in standard protocols. It saved his life. And when he got home, he discovered the same type of system exists in commercial aircraft." Walsh looked up sharply from her instruments. "What kind of system?" Emma set her tablet on the center console, her fingers navigating to the technical document. "An auxiliary navigation override. It was installed in most Boeing aircraft after a classified incident. I don't know the details, but my dad said it was some kind of cyber vulnerability that got patched with this backup. Most civilian pilots don't know about it because it's buried in military-grade emergency protocols." She pulled up the schematic, rotating the tablet so they could all see. The diagram showed a complex network of circuits, relays, and override switches buried deep in the aircraft's electrical systems. Torres leaned forward, squinting at the screen. His expression shifted from skeptical to intensely focused. "I've never seen this in any manual." "You wouldn't," Emma said. "It's not in civilian documentation. My dad only knew about it because of his classified work. But he taught me because," she met Torres' eyes, "because he said if I was ever on a plane and something went catastrophically wrong, this might be the difference between landing safely and not landing at all." Diana was studying the diagram now, her fighter pilot brain processing the information rapidly. "This is real," she said slowly. "I've seen references to this in classified briefings. Emergency override protocols for civilian aircraft in case of." She stopped, glanced at Emma. In case of certain scenarios. Cyber attack, Emma said quietly. That's what my dad said. They were worried about terrorists finding ways to remotely compromise aircraft systems. This override is a hard-wired backup that can't be accessed remotely. The cockpit went silent except for the hum of the engines and the occasional beep of warning alarms. Walsh broke the silence. Can you walk us through the procedure? Emma felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with terror. This was it. The moment her father had prepared her for. Yes, but it's technical and it's risky. There's a specific sequence. If you do it wrong, you could shut down the entire electrical system. How wrong are we talking? Tors asked. Complete electrical failure. No instruments. No engines. Total loss of aircraft. Emma's voice didn't waver even as she said the words. But if you do it right, it bypasses all the failed systems and reboots the navigation computer from a clean state. Tors looked at Diana. Diana looked at Walsh. They were all thinking the same thing. Trust the procedure explained by a 13-year-old girl, or try to navigate through a massive storm system with degraded instruments. We have 12 minutes before we hit the weather, Walsh said quietly. Maybe less. Diana stepped closer to Emma, her expression serious but not unkind. If we do this, if we try this procedure, are you absolutely certain you know it correctly? I'm not questioning your intelligence or your father's teaching, but lives depend on this. All of our lives. Can you be certain? Emma thought about lying, about saying she was 100% sure, completely confident, no doubts at all. But her father had taught her something else too. Honesty in the cockpit saves lives. I'm 90% certain, Emma said. I've memorized the procedure and my dad quizzed me on it dozens of times, but I've never actually done it. I've never even seen it done. So no, I can't be absolutely certain. The honesty hung in the air. Tors made a decision. 90% is better than the 0% chance we have of navigating blind through that storm. Walk us through it, step by step. Emma took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking again, but she forced them still. Okay, first, you need to access the maintenance panel under the center console. There's a blue wire cluster on the left side. That's the primary relay to the navigation system. Walsh was already kneeling, pulling open the panel. A tangle of wires and circuits greeted her. I see it, blue cluster. You need to disconnect it, Emma said, reading from her tablet but also from memory. When you do, about half the cockpit lights will dim. That's normal, it's rerouting power through the backup systems. Wait, Diana interrupted. If we disconnect that and this doesn't work, can we reconnect it? Emma bit her lip. My dad said once you start this procedure, you're committed. The system locks out the primary relay to prevent feedback loops. So if this doesn't work, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Tors looked at the weather radar. The massive storm cell was growing closer, a wall of red and purple that represented almost certain destruction if they flew into it blind. We're committed, he said. Walsh, disconnect it. Walsh's hand moved to the wire cluster. She paused, took a breath, and pulled. The cockpit lights dimmed. Several screens went dark. The hum of the electrical systems changed pitch. Oh God, Walsh whispered. It's okay, Emma said quickly. That's supposed to happen. Now you need to find a small black box connected to a green circuit board. It should be about the size of a deck of cards, mounted vertically on the right side. Walsh's hands moved through the tangle of wires, searching. I see it. Green board, black box. There's a reset button on the side of the box, Emma continued. You have to press and hold it while simultaneously inputting a code into the backup navigation display. And you have to do both within 3 seconds of each other, or the system locks out permanently. What's the code? Tors asked. Emma recited it from memory, her father's voice echoing in her head as he'd made her repeat it over and over. November 77 Charlie Foxtrot 33 Alpha 9. Diana moved to the keyboard. Military designation format, that's authentic. She positioned her hands. On your mark, Walsh. Walsh's finger hovered over the button. Her hand was shaking. Wait, Emma said suddenly. Everyone froze. You have to press the button first, then the code. Not simultaneously. My dad was specific about that. Button first, immediate code entry. 3 seconds total. Diana and Walsh looked at each other. You're sure? Diana asked. Emma closed her eyes, hearing her father's voice. Button first, baby girl. Always button first. Remember that. I'm sure, she said. Okay, Diana said. Walsh on 3, 1, 2, 3. Walsh pressed the button. Diana's fingers flew across the keyboard, typing the code with the speed and precision of someone who'd inputted coordinates while pulling 9GS in a combat turn. N77C F33A9. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The cockpit was silent except for the eternal hum of the engines and the desperate breathing of 4 people who just bet everything on a 13-year-old's memory. Then the backup navigation display flickered. Come on, Tors whispered. Come on, come on, come on. The screen went black. Emma's heart stopped. This was it. Either they'd just saved the aircraft or they'd killed it completely. Her father's voice echoed in her head. If it goes dark, don't panic. It's supposed to go dark. Give it 15 seconds to reboot. It's supposed to go dark, Emma said, her voice barely a whisper. It needs to reboot. 15 seconds. Diana was counting under her breath. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The plane shook. Turbulence, the leading edge of the storm system. We're out of time, Walsh said, staring at the weather radar. We're entering the cell. We need navigation now. Keep counting, Tors ordered, his hands tight on the yoke as the aircraft bucked. Stay with the procedure. 7 Mississippi, 8 Mississippi. Lightning flashed outside the windows so bright it hurt. Thunder boomed loud enough to rattle the cockpit. The plane dropped suddenly, an air pocket, and Emma grabbed the back of the captain's seat to keep from falling. 10 Mississippi, 11 Mississippi. Another violent shake. Warning alarms started screaming. The plane was being thrown around like a toy in the hands of an angry god. Passengers were screaming in the cabin behind them. 13 Mississippi, 14 Mississippi. The backup navigation screen flickered again. A single line of text appeared. System reboot in progress. It's working, Walsh shouted. Oh my God, it's working. But Emma was still reading her father's notes on her tablet, her eyes scanning frantically. Wait, there's more. Once the reboot starts, you have to input the aircraft's current position manually to give it a reference point. Otherwise, it won't know where we are. What position? Tors yelled over the noise of the storm. We don't know our exact position. That's the whole problem. Diana was already on it. Memphis Center, Flight 447. We need our exact coordinates now. Latitude and longitude precise to the second. The radio crackled with static. The storm was interfering. Then, Flight 447, your position is 37 degrees, 41 minutes, 12 seconds north, 91 degrees, 18 minutes, 33 seconds west. Diana typed furiously as the plane rolled hard to the left. She braced herself against the console, fighting to keep her fingers steady. Come on, you beautiful machine. Take it. Take the coordinates. The navigation screen flickered again. Lines of code scrolled past. Then, suddenly, position accepted. CALIBRATING sensors. Navigation system online. The main navigation display came to life. They had navigation. They had their exact position on a moving map. They had the storm system displayed in perfect detail. They had everything. Yes, Tors shouted. We're back. We have full navigation. But the celebration lasted exactly 2 seconds. Captain, look. Walsh pointed at the weather display with a shaking hand. The storm gap they'd been aiming for, The narrow corridor between the massive cells was closing. The two thunderstorm systems were merging faster than predicted. What had been a 15-mile gap was now maybe 8 miles wide, and shrinking. "We're not going to make it through," Diana said, her combat-trained mind calculating angles, speeds, closure rates. "Not at this heading. The gap will close before we reach it." Emma was still staring at her tablet, scrolling frantically through her father's files. There had to be something else, some other procedure, some way to. "Wait," she said, "what if we climb?" 3 sets of adult eyes turned to her. "The storm tops out at about 43,000 feet according to the radar," Emma continued, the words coming faster now as her mind raced. "We're at 35,000. If we do an emergency climb, maximum rate, we might be able to go over the top instead of through the gap." "This aircraft isn't designed to fly at 43,000 feet, Walsh said. "We'd be at the edge of the flight envelope, maybe beyond it." "But it's possible," Emma asked. Tors was already doing math in his head. "We'd have to dump fuel to reduce weight, and we'd need maximum engine power. We'd be running on fumes by the time we descended." But he looked at the shrinking gap on the weather display. "But it might work." Diana nodded slowly. "I've done high-altitude intercepts in fighters. The air is thin up there, controls get mushy. But if we're smooth, if we don't push the aircraft beyond its limits," she looked at Tors. "Your call, Captain, it's your airplane." Tors stared at the weather radar. The gap was now 6 miles wide, maybe 5. Every second they delayed was a second closer to disaster. He'd made thousands of decisions in his career, but this one felt different. This one had been informed by a 13-year-old girl who'd learned from her father's mistakes and turned that knowledge into salvation. "Memphis Center, Flight 447, Tors said into the radio. "We're initiating emergency climb to flight level 430. Request all traffic cleared above us." "Flight 447, Memphis Center, say again. Did you say flight level 430? "Affirmative. We're going over the storm, clear our path." Tors advanced the throttles to maximum. The engines roared. "Walsh, start dumping fuel. Diana, call out our altitude every 1,000 feet. Emma," he turned to look at her, "you just saved 183 lives. Now hold on tight because this is going to get rough." The plane tilted up, nose pointing toward the sky, climbing at an angle that made Emma's stomach drop. The G-forces pressed her back against the bulkhead. Through the windscreen, she could see nothing but gray clouds and lightning. 36,000 feet, Diana called out. "Climb rate 2,500 feet per minute." The aircraft shuddered. The controls were getting harder to manage as the air thinned. Tors was fighting the yoke, muscles straining, keeping the nose up, keeping them climbing. 38,000, climb rate holding. Lightning struck close, so close Emma smelled ozone. The plane lit up like a flashbulb. Every hair on her body stood on end. 40,000, climb rate decreasing, 2,100 feet per minute. They were slowing. The engines were screaming, giving everything they had, but the thin air wasn't giving them enough to bite into. "Come on," Tors grunted. "Come on, baby, just a little more." 42,000, climb rate 1,000 feet per minute. Through a break in the clouds, Emma caught a glimpse of what was below them. The storm was a monster, a churning mass of black and purple that looked like the end of the world. Lightning danced through it like veins of electricity. If they'd tried to fly through that blind, they would have been torn apart. 43,000, level off, level off. Tors pushed the yoke forward. The climb stopped. They were level, flying through air so thin it barely qualified as atmosphere, at the ragged edge of what the aircraft could handle. And they were above the storm. Emma looked out the window and saw the top of the cloud deck below them, lit by lightning from within like some kind of terrible light show. The sun was setting somewhere to the west, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if they weren't all fighting for their lives. "We're over it," Walsh said, her voice filled with disbelief. "We're actually over it." Diana was checking the navigation display. "The gap closed completely 30 seconds ago. If we'd stayed low, we'd be in the middle of that right now." Tors kept the plane steady, breathing hard, every muscle trembling from the effort. "How's our fuel, Jen?" Walsh checked her instruments. Her face went pale. "We have enough to reach Boston. Barely. We'll be landing on fumes." "I'll take barely," Tors said. He turned to look at Emma and his eyes were wet. "How did you know about climbing over it?" Emma thought about all those nights in the garage with her father, all the scenarios he'd made her work through, all the times he'd asked, "What would you do if?" And she'd rolled her eyes because it seemed like paranoid overkill. "My dad," she said simply. "He taught me that there's always another option. You just have to be brave enough to think of it and smart enough to execute it." Diana reached out and squeezed Emma's shoulder. Her hand was shaking. "Your father raised one hell of a daughter." The plane flew on through the thin, crystal-clear air above the storm, carrying 183 people who would never know how close they'd come to dying. How a 13-year-old girl's memory of her father's lessons had been the difference between landing in Boston and becoming a statistic. But the hardest part was still ahead. They still had to get down. The descent was the longest 20 minutes of Emma's life. Captain Tors flew that aircraft down through the thinning air with the precision of a surgeon, every movement calculated, every adjustment measured. They couldn't afford mistakes. Not now. Not when they were running on fumes with barely enough fuel to reach the runway. "Boston Logan, Flight 447 Heavy," Tors said into the radio, his voice hoarse from stress and adrenaline. "We are 50 miles out. Requesting priority landing, runway 22 left. Be advised we are critically low on fuel and have been operating under emergency conditions for the last 40 minutes. The controller's response came back immediately, professional but urgent. "Flight 447 Boston Logan. You are cleared for immediate approach, runway 22 left. All traffic has been diverted. Emergency services are standing by. The entire airport is yours, Captain." Through the cockpit windows, Emma could see the sun setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in colors that seemed impossible, deep purples, burning oranges, brilliant pinks. It was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that made you believe in miracles. Diana was still monitoring the navigation systems, her eyes never leaving the displays. Descending through 28,000 feet, all systems holding steady. The reboot worked perfectly, Emma. Your father's procedure was flawless. Emma felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. Her father. She needed to talk to her father. Needed to tell him that everything he'd taught her, every boring evening in the garage, every technical manual he'd made her memorize, it had all mattered. It had saved lives. "Fuel status?" Tors asked. Walsh checked the gauges and her face was grim. "We have maybe 10 minutes of fuel remaining, enough for one approach, one landing, no second chances." "Then we make the first one count," Tors said. The plane broke through the cloud layer at 15,000 feet, and suddenly Boston spread out below them, a carpet of lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over the city. Emma had seen this view dozens of times, coming home from trips, but never like this. Never with the weight of knowing how close they'd come to not seeing it at all. 10,000 feet, Diana called out. "Looking good, Captain. You're flying her beautifully." But Tors' hands were trembling on the yoke. Emma could see it from where she stood, braced against the bulkhead. He'd been manually flying this aircraft for nearly an hour under the most stressful conditions imaginable. He was exhausted, running on pure adrenaline and willpower. 5,000 feet, gear down. The landing gear deployed with a reassuring thunk. 3 green lights confirmed they were locked in position. 3,000 feet on glide slope, speed is good. Emma could see the runway now. A strip of lights growing larger in the windscreen, emergency vehicles lining both sides with their lights flashing red and blue like a corridor of warning and welcome simultaneously. The plane crossed the threshold at exactly the right altitude, the right speed. Tors pulled back on the throttle, flared the nose up slightly. The main wheels touched the runway with a gentle squeak. The nose gear settled. They were down. For a moment, no one in the cockpit spoke. They just sat there, breathing, letting the reality of survival wash over them like a wave. Then the cabin behind them erupted in applause, cheers, crying, a cacophony of relief and joy and disbelief that they were alive, that they'd made it, that the nightmare was over. Tors set the parking brake and turned to look at Emma, Diana, and Walsh. His eyes were streaming with tears he didn't bother to hide. We did it. We actually did it. Diana was crying too, her professional composure finally cracking. She pulled Emma into a fierce hug. You incredible, brave, brilliant kid. You saved us all. Emma hugged her back, finally letting her own tears fall. She was shaking, really shaking now, as the adrenaline drained out of her system and left her feeling hollowed out and exhausted. But they were alive. Everyone was alive. The cabin door opened and Emma was escorted out with Diana by her side. The jetway was packed with emergency personnel, airline officials, and airport security. Camera flashes went off like lightning. Someone was shouting questions. Emma couldn't process any of it. Then she saw her mother. Sarah Richardson stood at the gate, her face streaked with tears, her hands pressed to her mouth. When she saw Emma, she let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, and ran forward, pushing past everyone in her way. Emma, oh God, Emma. They collided in a hug so tight Emma couldn't breathe, but she didn't care. Her mother was sobbing into her hair, saying her name over and over like a prayer, like she couldn't quite believe she was real. I thought I lost you, Sarah gasped. They told me what was happening. They told me everything was failing and, oh baby, I thought I lost you. I'm okay, Mom, I'm okay. Emma pulled back to look at her mother's face. Dad's lessons, everything he taught me, it saved us. It really saved us. Sarah's expression crumpled. She pulled Emma close again, and Emma felt her mother's whole body shaking with sobs. Behind them, Diana was being interviewed by airport officials and FAA investigators who'd rushed to the scene. Captain Tors and First Officer Walsh were giving their statements, and someone had called the media because within 20 minutes, news vans were pulling up to the terminal, satellite dishes, extending toward the sky like flowers reaching for the sun. By that evening, Emma's face was on every news channel in America. 13-year-old saves commercial flight using father's military training. Teen hero uses classified procedure to restore navigation systems. Miracle at 35,000 feet. How a military kid became an unlikely savior. Emma sat in an airport conference room, wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth, watching herself on CNN. It didn't feel real. None of it felt real. Then an airline representative came in with a satellite phone. Emma, your father is calling from his carrier. He's been trying to reach you. Emma took the phone with shaking hands. Dad. Emma, his voice cracked across thousands of miles of distance. Emma, baby girl, are you okay? Are you hurt? Tell me you're okay. I'm okay, Dad, I'm okay. Emma felt fresh tears streaming down her face. Dad, I used the procedure, the navigation override, just like you taught me. I remembered everything. She heard him make a sound like he'd been punched. You saved them. Oh God, Emma, you saved all those people. You saved them, Emma corrected. You're the one who taught me. You're the one who made me learn it even when I thought it was pointless. You knew, didn't you? Somehow you knew I'd need it. I didn't know, her father said, and she could hear that he was crying too. After Syria, after I almost died, I couldn't stand the thought of you being in danger and not having the knowledge to save yourself. I needed you to know what I know. I needed you to be ready." "I was ready," Emma whispered. "Because of you, I was ready." "I'm so proud of you," Colonel Jack Richardson said, his voice breaking. "So damn proud. You listened, Em. When it mattered most, when lives were on the line, you remembered everything and you were brave enough to use it. Do you know how extraordinary that is?" Emma looked around the conference room, at her mother crying happy tears, at Diana Chen giving her a thumbs up from across the room, at the news coverage showing her face to millions of people. "It doesn't feel extraordinary," she admitted. "It feels like I just did what you would have done." "That's exactly what makes it extraordinary," her father said. The investigation took weeks. The FAA, Boeing engineers, and cybersecurity experts descended on Flight 447 systems. What they found shocked everyone. A sophisticated malware that had been designed to cascade through multiple systems, mimicking independent failures to avoid detection. Emma's procedure, the classified military override, had worked because it completely bypassed the infected systems and rebooted from a clean, isolated backup. The person who'd planted the malware was eventually caught, but that's another story. What mattered was that Emma Richardson, at 13 years old, had identified a solution that saved 183 lives. The commendations came quickly. The Air Force awarded her a civilian medal for valor, the first ever given to someone under 18. Boeing offered her a full scholarship to any university she wanted. MIT accepted her early admission application 3 years before she'd even graduate high school. But the most important moment came 6 months later, at a ceremony at the Air Force Academy. Emma stood on stage in front of all 183 passengers from Flight 447. Captain Torres was there in his dress uniform. First Officer Walsh stood beside him with her mother, the woman from seat 31B, who Emma had never met during the flight. Diana Chen was there, having become something like a second mother to Emma, mentoring her, teaching her to actually fly in Diana's private Cessna. And in the front row, in full dress uniform with every medal he'd ever earned gleaming on his chest, sat Colonel Jack Richardson, home from deployment at last. Emma stepped up to the microphone, looked out at the crowd, and found her father's eyes. "My dad always told me that knowledge is power," she began. "But it's not just about knowing things. It's about being ready to use what you know when the world calls on you to step up. I was just a kid who'd been paying attention when her dad talked, but that day, paying attention was enough." She paused, gathering her courage for what she wanted to say next. "Heroes aren't always adults in uniforms. Sometimes they're scared 13-year-olds with tablets full of their dad's flight manuals, hoping they remember the lessons right. Sometimes they're retired fighter pilots who are afraid but stand up anyway. Sometimes they're captains who make impossible decisions and first officers who trust teenagers when logic says they shouldn't." Emma's voice grew stronger. "But most of all, heroes are the parents who teach their children not just facts but readiness. Not just information, but courage. My father gave me the knowledge, but he also gave me something more important. He gave me the belief that I could use it when it mattered most." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Emma watched her father stand, watched tears stream down his face, watched him mouth the words, "I love you." She mouthed them back. Emma Richardson graduated high school at 16. She went to MIT for aerospace engineering with a perfect GPA and a full scholarship. She became a pilot herself, eventually joining the Air Force like her father, flying the same F-16s he'd flown. But she never forgot the day she woke up on Flight 447 and discovered that everything her father had taught her, all those boring lessons in the garage, all those technical manuals she'd thought she'd never need, had been preparing her for the most important moment of her life. Sometimes the most extraordinary heroes are ordinary people who were ready when the world called. And sometimes they're just kids who remembered what their dads taught them. The end.